I'm a total outlier here in this room. And I'll promise you that I don't have any equation in my slides. So it will be kind of a conversation and discussion about how social scientists, including policy scholars, communities, also lay public, how the non-scientists, geophysics and non-engineers, how do those people think about equity, justice, when every time we brought in those big technology changes into the energy system, no matter whether it is about renewable energy, whether it's about CCS or any other things, a lot of other things. So the topic today that I'm going to discuss is the equity study or equity research in energy transition. And I do want to bring some terminologies because I got asked a lot about what is justice, what is equity, right? So what are the things, right? This is kind of the buzzword that is popping around a lot in contemporary society. DOE in particular has the Justice 40 initiative, while all these government agency projects have to engage community, have to make sure that energy justice become a part of the project, the goal. So I think it's very important for us to take a look, what is actually considered as the justice discussion. So broadly, energy justice looked at the equity issues throughout the whole energy system, including the production, distribution, and consumption. And they are basically three philosophical underpinning of energy justice. The first one, distributive justice, which look at basically the distribution of costs and benefits associated with all these energy activities. So we can, for example, people talk about air pollution from fossil fuel consumption or fossil fuel-based power plants. And people talk a lot about low-income communities or minority groups. They tend to live closer to fossil fuel-based power plants. So that's a typical example of distributive injustice, because those populations tend to expose more or disproportionately from the air pollution from those fossil fuel-based power plants. And another type is called procedural justice. Well, people are more concerned about the process or the decision-making, whether there is a fair process of engaging community members in the decision-making process, whether they are informed, whether the decision-making process is transparent or not. So we study whether there are any efforts or attempts trying to make the process fair enough and then to reduce those injustices. And then recognition of justice, that basically is about whether a particular group or individual, they are acknowledged, like they are having a disadvantaged position in general in society. So oftentimes social scientists will study justice and equity issues through this three lens. And then I want to talk briefly about my own research and how I engage with energy justice topics in policy, public policy research. So first one, we looked at, in one project, we look at the distributive justice associated with the adoption of solar PV in the residential sector. Basically, we use the data published by the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab regarding the whole solar PV adoptions, installed systems in the US. And we look at, which social groups actually have adoption and how is the trend and magnitude of the adoption change over time. And as you can see from there, basically the Black communities, which is the green line, is always on the bottom, which demonstrates that they are in a very disadvantaged position when we talk about the residential solar adoption. And usually the Asians and the white communities, we are doing better than the other minority groups. A kind of outlier, which is the Hispanic group, this is kind of surprising. We do find that Hispanic communities, they do pretty well, especially at the lower income buckets. However, in the higher income buckets, the Hispanic communities, they don't do very well. So you can see this is the type of the study that we can describe. There is this distributed injustice in solar PV adoption. And then from a public policy perspective, we try to ask the question, are there any policy efforts trying to reduce these disparities in solar adoption? So we went in to search different types of policy documents, and then we will analyze the policy text language, like the specific language that policymakers would use in legislation, in regulation, in dockets, and then see what are the things, what are the policy design elements, and this can get into like very technical policy terms, and I won't go into that. But some examples, we would try to categorize the different types of policy instruments, and we did find that community solar program has become increasingly popular in the US as a way, as an approach used by governments to reduce the disparities in community access to solar benefits. And we also see like a large variety in terms of the who are eligible for example, the low income solar tax benefits provided by the government. And there is definitely a large variety by different states. And then build on that, we asked the question whether those policies are effective in reducing solar disparities. And then we use statistical approaches trying to identify the association between policy and the actual solar PV adoption in different, racial groups. And we did find that overall, we do see positive and significant policy impacts, reducing the disparity among the low-income communities, but the policy does not work very well, specifically for reducing solar adoption disparity among the Black communities. And then another very important topic in energy justice is related to the utility scale renewables. And a lot of times we talk about this clean energy transition, and people are usually pro large scale, like the renewables in general. But when we specifically look at the utility scale, those large wind turbines, solar farms, right? Actually at the local level, when you see looking at the host community or the potential host community, there are a lot of discussions on the ground regarding, do I want that in my in my community? I do like, a lot of people would say, I do like green energy or renewable energy, but I just don't want them in my county or in my state, right? So we do see a large percentage of the proposed wind projects were blocked in the US in the past few years. And there have been a lot of evidence showing strong local opposition to wind. When I lived in Michigan, for example, there were a lot of discussion along the Great Lakes region, because there was kind of a huge development over there trying to bring in a lot of wind turbines in the community, and then interact with the whole indigenous communities there, which are usually weak in terms of their political power. So that has been very controversial over there. So in this case, we tend to frame the large scale renewables as a disamenity for the hosting communities, right? We are not actually talking about the environmental benefits of those renewables, but it's more about the negative impacts, right, of those renewables. For example, when we talk about wind, people think about the negative impact on the landscape, the noise pollution, impact on biodiversity, so on and so forth. So a question here is that, as I mentioned, people don't want those large-scale renewables in their backyard. That's a widely acknowledged argument in environmental policy, which is not in my backyard, right? I don't want those as environmental beds. I don't want them near me. And then the question here that we want to ask is, do disadvantaged communities, do they get to host those large-scale renewable energy projects more than the relatively wealthy and white communities? And another thing related to that is when we look at the decision-making process for determining where those large-scale wind and solar farm will be located, usually it's the local governments that's deciding, right? It's through the zoning ordinance, it's through the siting and the permitting process, and also in terms of the policy, there's a large variation in terms of, whether the state has the authority, whether the state share authority with the local, and what kind of policies exist at the local level. So in another project, we actually code specific zoning ordinance among all the counties in Michigan, and then we try to measure the relationship between the stringency or how strict the zoning ordinance is and how that relates to the actual location of the wind turbine. We want to see whether, the policy has any impact on the geographic location of the wind. And then the preliminary results show that if the government has more stringent regulation on wind, for example, higher standards regarding the setback distance, so they require a larger distance between the wind and the community, it tends to push wind into lower income community, which basically is saying that more stringent public policy tends to protect maybe the white and wealthy communities so they don't have to host the wind, but instead the lower income communities tend to host the wind more. So in terms of the future, I think I'll just throw out some ideas out there. So for future collaboration purpose and more discussions, we are very interested in looking at the public participation process in the renewable energy siting. So how can governments design more transparent, more equitable process to engage the public in the siting and permitting process? And another one, the second one is related to community solar in particular, because EPA just, I think they have about 50, I think more than 50 grants awardees across the US for Solar for All. That's the community, large community solar project. So we are very interested in working with state governments and community organizations to understand how governments can design process to reduce administrative burden for the disadvantaged communities, and then trying to better, reach out to the disadvantaged communities and then to help promote, trying to invite their participation in community solar. So I think that one is also like very relevant for carbon for CCS project, very similar ideology along that line. And then the last one, air pollution reduction benefits of clean energy transition. So as we switch from fossil fuel-based energy system to renewables, it's kind of interesting for me to understand what are the implications in terms of community exposure to air pollution, right? And that there will be some environmental justice implications